It is great to have all of you here today for part 5, our closing part of a 5-part series that we are calling Stand. And this has been a really fun series that we've been walking through. Before we jump into the content for today, I did want to let you know about a couple of important things. First of all, next Sunday is Easter Sunday, which is really hard to believe, but it is. It's our first Sunday as a church, and we're so excited about that. So I want to encourage those of you who are guests, you can tune me out for the next 30 seconds, that's fine. Those of you who would call City North home, I want to encourage and challenge each one of you to invite somebody this coming Sunday. We are a church that is committed to being a church not for the people who are here, but for the people who are not here yet. And we just believe that there's a lot of people in this world that need some hope and that need some light in their life. And we're committed to being that. And so if you call City North home, I want to encourage you today on your way out at the Next Steps table in the Commons. There are some little flyers and some little invite cards. Grab some of them and invite somebody to church this week. You never know who is going through something in their life and just needs somebody to reach out. The other thing I wanted to let you know about is that in 2 weeks, we're starting a brand new message series that I am very excited about. I'm excited about every message series, but I'm especially excited about this one called I Want to Believe But. And I've got a little pre-roll video that I just want to show you for that real quick. All right, I am very excited about that message here. I know a lot of people that I'm friends with in my life who struggle with hard questions and who struggle with some of those things that were being shown there on the screen. So I want to encourage you to come back in 2 weeks for the beginning of that message series. It'll be a 5-week series. It's going to be really, really great. But today we're going to close up our series called Stand. Now, in this series, we've been talking about how we can stand out in a world that makes it so easy to blend in. If you have your message notes that were in your worship guide when you walked in, if you want to grab those and follow along there, sometimes that makes it easy to keep up. Today, we've got a lot to cover and we don't have a lot of time, so we're going to try to get through it pretty quick. Now, in this series, we've covered 4 different stories from the book of Daniel, which is in the Old Testament of the Bible. And in this book, there's all kinds of really cool stories that show us some incredible things about how to stand in this world. Today, we're going to talk about how we can stand firm in the fire. And this is so crucial. It is so crucial because there is a season of fire for everyone. And I don't know where you are in your life, but I would almost even submit it to you this way, that there's really only kind of 3 seasons of life. You're either coming out of a hard time, in the middle of a hard time, or about to enter a hard time. It just seems like no matter how life goes, there's just always difficulty, sometimes difficulty that's very, very hard to overcome. And so today, what we're gonna do is really tackle that issue, is how do we stand firm in the midst of the fire in our lives? Now, I don't know what those fires are for each of you, but the reality is I want to bring a little bit of weight to this. I apologize for messing with this microphone. It's not staying where I want it to. I don't know what the fire in your life is, some different ones that I have seen people go through and that I've been through myself. Perhaps maybe recently you've gotten some bad news medically. Maybe you've lost a job recently. Maybe you've been betrayed in a close relationship. Maybe you've stumbled upon really hard financial times and you don't know why because you're doing everything you know how to do. But no matter who you are, no matter what season of life you're in, we all go through seasons of fire. And I believe that this story we're going to look at today in the book of Daniel can give us tremendous hope because we have a problem for those of you who are Christians, we have a problem as American Christians. We tend to think that because we're Christ followers, nothing bad should ever happen to us. Don't we? Don't we ask this question when bad things happen like, well, I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do. Why would God let this happen to me? Why wouldn't God protect me from this circumstance? Why wouldn't God take care of this situation? I know he can. Why didn't he? And we just have a tendency to, as Christians, think that things should go smoothly in our lives, and then they don't. And we're left kind of asking this big question of why. Now, before we actually dig into the story, I want to kind of give you the bottom line. I don't usually do things this way, but what I'm going to do in the story is illustrate this truth for you. Because I believe this truth has the power to change those circumstances and change the way you ask those questions and really change your life. This is what I want you to know today, and that's this. A faith that has been tested is a faith that can be trusted. A faith that has been tested is a faith that can be trusted. If you want to write that down in your message notes, if you're a writer and you like to take notes, do it. It says it this way in 1 Peter chapter 7 in the Bible. It says, these trials will show that your faith is genuine. It is being tested as fire tests and purifies gold, though your faith is more precious than gold. So when your faith remains strong through many trials, it will bring you much praise and glory and honor on the day when Jesus Christ is revealed to the whole world. A faith that has been tested is a faith that has been trusted. Now what I want to do is back up. I want to show this to you. Because here's the problem when we talk about faith. Often when we talk about faith, it's this very abstract concept. And people don't really know how to define it. People don't even really know what it looks like. It's just hard to grip. And so what I want to do today is give teeth to this idea of faith. I want you to trust me for a moment. Usually I would lay out a whole argument for why something is true and then give you the truth. Today I gave you the truth up top. So I want you to trust me, and then we're gonna dig into this story. I wanna show you 3 things that are essential for faith. And I believe that no matter what fire you face in your life, you can overcome any of them, and come out on the other side, not just okay, but even better, if you can apply these principles and these truths to your life. And I wanna say too on this, I'm not gonna share much of this today. None of this is stuff that I know because I read the Bible and the Bible says so. This is stuff that I believe because I've experienced it and I've lived it in my own life. 2.5 years ago, my wife and I went through hell. We did. We went through the hardest time that I can imagine going through. I've shared bits and pieces of the story before. We were days away from ending our marriage. And honestly, the only thing at the time that saved it was we had a 4-month-old daughter at home. And if we hadn't had her, we wouldn't have made it. We went through an absolutely terrible season as a family. I hated God for a period of time. Listen, I'm a pastor, I can say that. I hated God for a season in my life because of what I thought he had done to me and to us. And again, I don't want to share too many details of that story today because I don't have time to. But I just want you to know, if you're in the middle of a season of fire in your life, I'm not up here going, well, the Bible says this, so do this and you'll be okay. I'm saying I've walked this. And if you're at the end of your rope and you don't know who else to talk to, come talk to me afterwards. I'll share my story with you. And just know that this is not Bible stuff. This is life stuff. Let's take a look at this story in the book of Daniel. What we have here is I want to review a little bit. We have a king. King Nebuchadnezzar is the king of Babylon at this time in history. This is about 5,000 years ago, most scholars think. And there's 3 young men. What King Nebuchadnezzar had done is he had gone in and conquered the nation of Israel. He had just defeated them. He tried to wipe them off the face of the earth. We covered a lot of this actually in week 1 and set the stage for some of this. And what happened is he took some of the best and brightest young men, young teenage boys, like 11 to 13 or 14. He brought them back to Babylon and he said, we're gonna indoctrinate them and make them not leaders of their culture and their country and their religion. We're gonna make them leaders in ours, so that religion and that people group is they're just gone. They're wiped off the face of the earth. And here we have these 3 young men who at first their names are Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And immediately after the king brings them to Babylon, he renames them. And he renames them Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, if you've grown up in church, all those names might sound familiar to you because their names form kind of the basis for one of the most famous stories in all of the scriptures, the story of the fiery furnace. And if you're not familiar with it, it's a neat story. I hope we can bring some new light to it today. And so these guys are there, and what happens is the king decides, because he's the king of the most powerful nation at the time on earth, that he wants to build a statue. That he builds a statue 90 feet high and 90 feet tall and 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. I don't know why I'm saying 30, 9 feet wide. It's a big statue. It's at the time, massive. It can be seen for just forever around. And he issues a decree and says that, hey, this is what's gonna happen. Every time anybody in our kingdom hears music playing, they have to bow down and worship the statue because I'm awesome. That's what he thinks. And so he does this. He issues this decree. He calls in all of his leaders and he calls in these three boys. They get kind of all the leaders in the kingdom. He fills them in. He's like, this is what's gonna happen. Music's gonna play in a minute, so get ready. You're gonna bow down. And this is what happens in Daniel chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. It says, this is the king speaking. He says, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all the other musical instruments, bow to the ground to worship King Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue. Anyone who refuses to obey will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. The story goes on. And in verses 12 through 15, we find out that everyone in the kingdom, everyone is bowing down before the statue as the music plays, except three young boys, ages 11 to 14, early middle school, 6th through 8th grade. And this is what I want you to see. The first thing that I want you to see in their story is this. This is our first principle of faith today, is that faith obeys God instead of following man. Faith obeys God instead of following man. Look at how this plays out in the story, starting in verse 16. The king brings the boys before him, and this is what he says. He says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He gets on their case. He said, why are you not bowing? You're gonna be thrown in the furnace. And this is their response to him. They say, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. So I just want to bring some weight to this because that's a really arrogant thing to say. It's one thing to read it on the screen. There's three middle school boys standing before the most powerful king in the world at the time. And he says, I'm about to kill you. And they go, yeah, we don't need to defend ourselves. Can you see a middle school boy being lippy like that? Some of you work with middle schoolers, you're going, yeah, I want to see that. But it's interesting, I don't read that verse as if they're being lippy in just a kind of middle school boy kind of a way. There's a confidence there. You see, these young boys had decided way before. There's this idea all throughout the book of Daniel where they've predetermined the way they're going to act. These young boys have predetermined in their mind, we will not ever worship another God. There is one God, we will worship him. They had predetermined that they would obey God instead of following man. Now, if I'm those boys, it would have been really easy to rationalize a different plan. I'm good at that. Right? I don't know about you, but when I'm stuck in a difficult situation or circumstance, it's easy for me to find a way around. Like, hey, maybe I'm just gonna have a little conversation with God and be like, hey, God, we've been doing this thing, we're pretty good. How about you just let me bow down and I'll fake it and then I won't die. Does that sound good? Like I'm not really worshiping this statue. I'm just gonna kind of fall over. Sound good? Or maybe they could have maybe they could have had a conversation with God and said, hey, we're just gonna worship the statue this once because again, we don't wanna die. And really, what good are we if we're dead anyway? Like we can't do any good for you if we're dead. So we're just gonna worship this thing once and then we're gonna ask forgiveness and then it'll all be good, right? We do that sometimes in our own lives. I'm gonna make you a promise today, and that promise is this. If you're committed to serving God in your life, you have a spiritual enemy, the devil. I don't know what you think about that when I say that. Maybe you're like, oh no, he's talking about the devil. No, we'll move on quickly, don't worry. But you have a spiritual enemy in your life who is set on destroying you. And I can promise you this, that if you are doing your best in your life to serve God, to follow him, and to live according to his ways, your spiritual enemy is gonna provide you ample opportunities to compromise. He's going to, because that's his goal, is to get you to make little compromises that don't seem like a big deal, but a lifetime of little compromises can take you down a path you never intended to go. Faith obeys God instead of following man. My wife and I, this church, for those of you that don't know, City North Church is a little more than 6 months old now. We launched September 18th of 2016. And this journey was one that we never expected. And frankly, we never even wanted. I shared briefly before about kind of what we went through 2.5 years ago. And there was a season of life where I've grown, listen, I grew up in church. I've been in church my whole life. I've always been a leader in church. I was a youth pastor for a lot of years professionally. And what happened with us made me so angry at God and so angry at the church that I didn't want anything to do with God, with the church, none of it. I was done. And what happened is as God began to heal our hearts and began to send us some incredible people along the way, he began to plant a dream in my heart to come home here and to plant a church for people who don't like church, who have been broken and messed up, and who have been hurt by church people because sometimes Christians are jerks. And I had a dream in my mind of planting a church and creating a place where anyone could come, no matter what you believe, no matter what you did last night, no matter where you are in your life, and you could come and just be here, and we would love you, we wouldn't care, and we would try to lead you to Jesus. Now, when we started to tell our family and friends about this dream, several of them said, you want to do what? How are you going to raise money? We're going to ask people to give us money. Why would they? Because we think God called us to this. How much money are you going to try to raise? $100,000. What? Well, where are you going to live? Hey, mom and dad, what if your house in Kentucky doesn't sell? What if nobody comes? I know what God called us to. And yeah, it's crazy. And we had some family members, that were very kind and gracious to us. They thought we were idiots and they didn't tell us that. We had some family members that told us that. We had a lot of people that discouraged us from going on this journey because it was crazy. It was crazy. And we launched September 18th of 2016 with 125 people in attendance. We raised $100,000. We launched a church. We've seen 16 people give their hearts to Jesus or recommit their lives to Jesus in the 6 months of our church. And we've seen dozens and dozens and dozens of people come through the doors. And I don't know what God has done in their lives, but I've had conversations with people who have said, I was done, I was giving up, I was hurt, I was broken, and something just felt like home. And I went, you know what? That crazy dream that God put in my heart, it came to pass. And it didn't come to pass because I'm amazing, because I'm not. And it didn't come to pass because we knew everything we were doing and we didn't make any mistakes. If I had this journey to do all over again, I would do everything differently because we messed it almost all up. But God has done incredible things in people's lives, not because of anything we've done, but because we were obedient to a call of God that was crazy. And for some of you, there may be something that God has started to birth in your heart. There may be something that God is calling you to, something that you feel like God wants you to do in your life. And you're going, no, that's risky. When we moved, we hadn't sold our house. We actually closed on our house a week and a half ago in Kentucky. So we made 12 months of mortgage payments in a house that we didn't step foot in. It was awesome. And my parents were gracious and let us live there. But there were a lot of unknowns and there were a lot of risks. We were obedient. We were obedient. We didn't listen to what people said, even though most people were logically right. We've trusted God, and God has provided every step of the way. He sent us an unbelievable team of people. Listen, if you guys don't know some of our team, get to know some of them because it's ridiculous. He sent us an amazing team. He's done incredible things. Faith obeys God instead of following man. The second thing that I want you to see today is this: faith believes in spite of what it sees. Faith believes in spite of what it sees. I could have told that story on this point too. But look at how this plays out in Daniel chapter 3. Again, we're just going to walk through these verses. The last verse we read was 16. This one we're going to read Daniel chapter 3, verse 17. Guys, can we get that up on the screen? There we go. This is what the boys say to the king next. They say, if we are thrown into the blazing furnace, watch this, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. Again, being a little lippy here. But my goodness, what kind of confidence, what kind of just total confidence in God's power is that? And I want you to notice too in that verse, there's kind of two things going on here. First, they say God is able to save us. And then they say they don't use the word, but they say he will, they say he is willing. And listen, there's a difference between being able to do something and being willing to do something, isn't there? And I want you to know today that the God who we serve is not a God who is just able, but he is a God who is willing. In fact, the Bible says at one point that God desires to give good gifts to his children. He wants to do great things for us. He doesn't just want us to languish in misery. Now, there's a plan. There's things that he's doing sometimes that we can't see. But the point is, just like for those of you who are parents, you don't want your kids to be miserable. Now, you know there are seasons in life where they have to go through hard things or they won't learn. They have to be punished. They have to experience the consequences of their actions or they won't learn and grow. But as a parent, you are able and you are willing to do what you have to do to meet them where they are. And God is that same way. No matter what I see, my faith says that my God is able and he is willing. And I want you to know today that whatever you are going through, if you've gotten a bad medical report, if you have a broken relationship that you don't know what to do about, if you have a child that's running away from God and you are praying, and it doesn't seem like God is there, I need you to know today, God is able and he is willing. He is able and he is willing to do exceedingly and abundantly more. Now, we all know stories of people who have been miraculously healed or delivered from something in their life that you can't explain with science. My faith believes in spite of what it sees, but there's a but. What if God doesn't come through? What if God doesn't do what I'm believing him for? What if I spend years and years and years and years and years in prayer, believing God that he is going to do X, Y, Z in my life? And I'm doing everything I can for him. What if he doesn't come through? And I would imagine that for many of you, you've experienced that in your own life. And it's left questions of doubt in your mind. It's left questions where you're wondering, where was God? Because I needed him to show up now and he wasn't here. What do we do with that? Well, watch what happens. I'm gonna throw you guys a curveball again, my bad. Watch what happens in verse 18. This, I think, is one of the most powerful verses in all of the Bible. As the boys finish what they're saying to the king, they say this: but even if he, or God, even if God doesn't, meaning deliver us, even if he doesn't deliver us, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue that you have set up. There's a song by a band that I really like that they actually made this whole story into a song. The chorus says, burn us up, burn us up, burn us up, O king. Won't you throw us in the furnace of your desires? And there's a line in there. They go into the bridge and they say, but even if you don't, burn us up. Even if God doesn't deliver us, burn us up, because we will never bow. We will never bow. And this is the third thing that I want you to know today about faith. Faithful obedience is our responsibility. The outcome is God's. Faithful obedience is our responsibility. The outcome is God's. Now, this is maybe easy to say. It's easy to look at this story and go, well, yeah, okay, the guy, like, we know, for those of you who know, we know how the story ends. So, like, the boys were fine. But they didn't know the middle in the beginning. Or they didn't know the end in the middle, I'm sorry. They didn't know how this was going to turn out when they're standing before the king. All they knew was, king said bow or you burn. We didn't bow, so we don't know how this is going to turn out. I assume the king's going to kill us. Faithful obedience is our responsibility. The outcome is God's. Now, here's what happens as we finish up the story today. Once the boys say this to the king, they give this kind of mouthy and defiant monologue to the king, and the king gets mad. Because wouldn't you, if you had some 7th grade boys talking to you like that? And so the king says, hey, heat that furnace up to 7 times what it normally is. I'm gonna fry these guys. And so they do. They heat the furnace up to 7 times. 7 times hotter. And they go to throw the boys in. Before they do, watch this in verse 23. It says this, and these three men firmly tied. I want you to file that, firmly tied, because it's really important here in a minute. These three men firmly tied fell into the blazing furnace. Now the Bible actually a couple verses earlier says that the guards that took them to the mouth of the fire, they actually died outside the furnace because the fire was so hot. So they throw the boys in firmly tied. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leapt to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't there three men that we tied up and threw into the fire? And they said, yeah, we did. And he said, look, I see four men walking around in the fire. And notice this next word, unbound and unharmed. And the fourth looks like a son of the gods. I need some of you to hear this today. We think that the fire is where God is the most distant because we see the fire. But the reality is the fires in our lives are the times and the seasons where we will experience the presence of God most fully in our lives if we can take our eyes off the fire and look for him in it. If you're in the season of fire, I want you to know God is there. God is with you. Now, it's easy to just see the flames because they're what consume us. But God is there. There's a second thing that I want you to notice in this, and I told you to notice those couple things, that they were tied up and then that they were unbound. And here's the other thing that I want you to understand today, and this is not in your notes, but that it is often the very thing that binds us that God uses the fire to deliver us from. In my life, some of the darkest sin that was in my life, some of the worst things about who I was, God never could have cleansed me. He never could have set me free from those things if it hadn't been for the fire that he put me through. And I'll tell you this right now, I wouldn't wish what my wife and I went through on my worst enemy. It was horrible. It was absolutely terrible. But when I look back on what we went through, who I was before, and who God made me into after, I can tell you this, I was bound. I was a slave to sin in my life. There was stuff in my life that was very much at the depth of who I was that I didn't let anybody in. I didn't want anybody to see. I didn't want anybody to know about. I just kept it to myself. But I was bound. I was in chains. I was miserable. I was unhappy. I was a Christian. Like I was going to heaven, but I was miserable in my life. And God took a season in my life that I never would wish on anybody, a season of fire, a season of pain, a season of hurt. And he used that fire to burn those ropes off of me. He used that fire to set me free. And I'm telling you today, I would not be who I am now. This church would not be in existence today if it weren't for the fire that I went through, because the things that bound me could only be burned off in the hottest fire. And for some of you, you may be in a season of fire right now, and all God is doing is he's saying, be patient. Be patient, because when you've been through the fire, you will come out differently on the other side. Your chains will be broken. Your ropes will be released. You will be a slave no more. But often it's only the fire that can allow that. As the story closes in verse 28, it says this, then Nebuchadnezzar said, praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and go back. I apologize. That just read weird to me. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any God except their own God. In the end, the fire that they went through, this willingness to put their lives on the line, this willingness to have faith, radical faith that believed in spite of what it saw, faith that obeyed God instead of following man, and faithfulness that simply obeyed instead of worrying about the outcome. It didn't just change them. It changed the king. And by proxy of changing the king, it changed a kingdom. God does incredible things through people who are willing to go through the fire, not because it's fun and not because it doesn't hurt and not because it's not terrible. because it's all those things. And for those of you who are in the middle of the fire, I don't want to minimize that. I'm not sitting here today to tell you like, oh, you should just be happy, because it stinks and it's hard. And sometimes God seems distant and like he's a million miles away. But for those people who can have the strength to stand firm in the fire and keep the right perspective, God always does miracles. Always. Always. And so today what I want to do is kind of end you with this. I just want to give you one like very tangible, practical thing to do. And this might seem very silly, and it might seem like some kind of a, I don't know, some kind of a self-help, self-improvement kind of a thing. There's been a lot of research done on the power of words and how the words you speak actually like physiologically impact your brain. And I happen to believe that if you stand all the time and say, well, look at what I'm going through and I'm this and that and God, where's God? And that's what you're going to believe. And that's the way your life is going to be. And so I want to give you one practical thing that you can do in the season of fire. And that's this: when you're in the season of fire, speak this truth over and over and over. My pain today will be my hope tomorrow. My pain today will be my hope tomorrow. The Apostle Paul says it this way in the book of Romans. He says, we also have joy with our troubles. We have joy with our troubles because we know that these troubles produce patience, and patience produces character, and character produces hope. If you're in the fire and you have no hope, if you're in the fire and you have no hope, you don't need to get out of the fire. You don't need to. You want to, but you don't need to. What you need is to understand that God is with you. He is with you. You need to look for him in the flames. And as you find him, you need to let the ropes burn. Wait for him to set you free. And I promise you that when he does, the future will be better than you could ever have imagined it before. And again, I don't say that because the Bible tells me so. I say that because I sit before you today knowing that my life was once ash from fire. My life was absolute ash. It was death and devastation and misery. And God found me there. And he redeemed a broken man. He made me whole. He saved my life. He saved my marriage. He saved my family. And he gave me a dream for something greater than I ever could have imagined before. That is the God who I serve. That is the God who is with me in the fire. That is the God who will walk with you in the fire too. Will you pray with me this morning? Jesus, we come before you today and we're so thankful for your word. We're so thankful for this story in the book of Daniel. And God, today I pray for every person here who is in the middle of a fire. God, be with them. God, may your presence be there. Give them strength, give them courage. God, when their strength is ended, when their courage has ended, God, be the strength in their weakness. Be the hope when they are hopeless. Be the joy when they are mourning. God, for every one of us, help us to be people who walk with you, people of radical, extraordinary faith, people who understand that when our faith is tested, then it can be trusted, that when we have gone through the fire, we can have hope. Now, if you'd keep your heads bowed and eyes closed, I want to talk to those of you today just for a moment who maybe you don't have a relationship with Jesus Christ. Maybe you're here today and maybe you grew up in church, maybe you've had a religious experience with God. You've gone to church, but you've never walked with God. You've never had a relationship with Jesus, a life-giving, life-changing, with me in the fire and brings me out on the other side kind of a relationship. And you hear me say that and you go, oh my goodness, I don't even know how, but I want that. It's available to you here and now. The Bible says this. It says that if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart, that you'll be saved. And that pile of ash that I once was, all it took was that. And God made me new. And I began to pursue him. Now listen, I'm not telling you that you need to join this church. I'm not telling you that you need to give your money. I'm asking you, do you want a life-giving and life-changing relationship with Jesus Christ? Here in a minute, we're gonna pray a simple prayer of faith. Before we do, if that's you this morning with every head bowed and every eye closed, if you want that relationship, maybe you once did, but it's gone now and you want it again, or maybe you've never had it to begin with and you want it today, would you just simply raise your hand so I know and I can pray for you? Awesome. Great. If you raise your hand, we're gonna say a simple prayer of faith. And if you didn't raise your hand, but you want that life and you want that relationship with Jesus, raising your hand doesn't do a thing. It was just for me to see and pray for you. So you pray this prayer after me if you want that relationship silently to yourself today. Say, Jesus, thank you for dying on the cross for my sin. Thank you for your promise of giving me new life. Today, and this is an important word, God, today I surrender to you. I give you everything. I give you my life. Help me every day, the best I know how, to follow you. Give me the strength when I'm weak. Help me learn and grow. In your name, I pray. Amen. Amen. Hey, let's celebrate anyone this morning who made a decision to follow Jesus.